welcome to the Modeling Success in Action podcast. I'm Jessica Taylor, your host, and today I am joined by the amazing Kevin Parton. So Kevin is a seasoned financial planner with over 14 years of experience. He's specializing in helping business owners and professionals align their wealth with their values. As a partner at VELA Wealth, he focuses on helping people increase their income, build wealth, and use their life to create meaningful impact. Beyond work, he's a dedicated family man, fundraiser, and advocate for living with purpose. Welcome, Kevin.
Oh, thanks for having me. So excited to be here, Jessica.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. So Kevin is a financial planner, but he's also a wicked networker and connector and builder of communities. And watching him over the past few years, it's been pretty incredible to see him really show up in some pretty awesome ways. So Kevin, teach me a little bit about, you and where you're coming from so that we can kind of start to get a sense of who you are.
Yeah. A quick little background. We have two daughters, wonderful kids, 3 and 7, and a wonderful wife. And they are kind of unintentionally my motivation. I know very profoundly that I want to be someone who helps create a world for them that they can thrive in. And that's been the catalyst for some change. And so that'll kind of circle back around to modeling and how it's showed up in my life and where it wasn't showing up in my life and how that's made some pivotal changes. But I got into wealth management, if you will, because I grew up in a household where money wasn't really a known subject, which is kind of common for most families. It's not taught very well in school. They don't really teach you a whole lot as it relates to practical finance. Sometimes there's questions in math that have to do with dollars, but in no way do you know how to go about life. And when you get an income, where does it go and what are taxes? And so there's interesting belief systems around it in the world. People relate to it differently. And and so as I got older, I recognized that there's just a lot of people who don't understand it, and thus their experience of life is impacted. Money, however you feel about it, is a tool that allows you to do all the things that you might want to do. And so if you don't understand that tool, then you really are limited. In addition to that, human psychology has fascinated me, and behavior, as we'll sort of get to, and I'm sure you're well aware, informs virtually everything we do and how we approach life. So financial planning, or wealth management, as it were, is kind of the crossroads between those two. It's the technical side of money, how it works, how you can use it, accounts, investing, what have you. And then the human component, which is how do you relate to wealth? How do you relate to money? How does it make you feel? How do you use it? What are your values? How do you align? And so being in wealth management allows me the opportunity to work with people and bring those two sides together, and understanding of who they are, and understanding what they want to do, and then the technical side of financial planning. And my career has evolved over 14 years. And in the last 18 months, I've been through personally some pretty significant changes, where I'm trying to take a much more holistic approach to wealth management, and recognizing that it's not just the technical side of what you do with money that matters. It's how you build a life that you're happy with that actually matters. Because I think we're all aware that there are lots of people who are very rich and unhappy. And so money is not an answer to solving your problems. And there are things that you can do in your life that seem unrelated to making money, like working on yourself, being happy and fulfilled, working on your relationship, giving back, acts of service, all of which directly or indirectly influence how good you are at earning money, how you relate to money, how you save money. And so you can actually build wealth in a much more meaningful way by focusing on areas that seem different. So that's kind of where I've landed at now. It's through my own personal experiences, recognizing that wealth management isn't just put money in an account, make it grow, I'll be rich and happy one day. It's much more nuanced and complex, and it takes really looking at someone's entire life to understand how that works out.
Yeah. I say to my clients all the time, it's all one, right? Like we can't just have something over here and be like, oh yeah, it's not affecting anything that's going on over here. It's all one, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to be able to be in life in this really holistic way, as you were saying, to kind of look at all these things. So you answered a bunch of my questions before I even asked them, but I want to dive even further into this. So I'm curious,
Please.
like you say that you grew up in a house where money wasn't really like money mindset and, taking care of your finances was not like part of like the family education.
Mhm.
So how did you start to, what was your experience with, getting into that and shifting that for yourself? Did you have to model some people? Did you have to look around and go, hey, like, how did those rich people get rich? Like, I'm curious, teach me about how that happened for you.
Yeah, so my fascination with money first came from growing up in an environment where it wasn't plentiful, and in fact, it was the opposite. Anytime we wanted something as kids, we would ask for it, and then the joke would be, "Why ask for one? Why not ask for five?" Like it's so outlandish that you would want something, you might as well just ask for a crazy amount. So there was this kind of like tongue-in-cheekness about money, and it was always something that was unattainable, and so it was just this like taboo thing. So then I was like, I never want money to be a decision or a reason why I don't do anything. But I started pursuing it in maybe an unhealthy way, which is like, I just want to be rich because that's the answer to all the problems. So when I was young, I wanted to be an actor because actors are rich. Now that sort of maybe informs why I'm a little bit more of an extroverted person as well. And maybe there was more of an alignment there internally than I think. But it most certainly was motivated by, if I am a famous actor, I will be rich, and rich will solve the problems. So
That's
that
pretty
didn't
cool though, that you
come
have
to
this
fruition.
drive to be the actor, because modeling, what we're talking about, is method acting,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Okay. So you decide, I'm going to be this rich
Yeah.
actor.
That didn't work, as it were. But what ended up happening was in my early 20s, a girlfriend of mine at the time, her father was a financial advisor. And so what I saw in him, so rather than looking at someone who was rich and saying that's the outcome I want, I'll take that profession. I started looking at what are the behaviors of a person that I admire, and I'll behave like them in order to get the outcome. And so he was a father of four. He drove his kids to school. He could pick them up. He built his work life around his family life. Those were things that I admired. He had built a business over 3 decades where he was the financially smart guy amongst a group of otherwise successful people. So he'd help elevate them financially. So he worked with his friends at this point. And so his job consisted of hanging out socially, but obviously building that was admirable. And he was just a really grounded human being. And again, I grew up in an environment where it was my understanding that there was a morality to it. To be rich meant to be bad because you can only get rich or acquire wealth by stepping on people. So there's this weird, like a lot of these belief systems that were ingrained where like, I want the money because I didn't have it, but if I were to get it, that would make me bad. And it becomes conflicting, which, over time resulted in sort of self-sabotage. I can pursue money, but deep down, I don't want it. And I'm,
Right, that's a pretty common dichotomy that people get caught in, right? They want to have the money, but they've grown up to think people with money are these evil things, and then there's this shame and this guilt in ourselves about wanting that thing, right, that we have to come to terms with. And so when we can kind of let go of the morality of it all and look at money as it is a catalyst, it is energy that helps you get the things that you want to do in life, right? It is the thing that helps you impact those changes, right? And so what you said at the very beginning was that, your family really is that driver thing. You start with the outcome, right? You are starting with the why. What's the outcome? Where are we going? And then everything else you're doing is in line with that. That's pretty cool. So teach me, Kevin. So as you were, modeling these people and having these experience, what did you notice about those high level beliefs that these people held?
well, early on, again, I think it was less about the beliefs they held, and it wasn't quite the same modeling. It was like, I like who this person is as a parent, so I want to work in a field in which I can manage my schedule. I like the idea of working in a career I can get paid really well. I like the social component. So there's those things to it. But then as time went on, and this is something that I've become familiar with, is you can start doing something that is aligned with an outcome you want or behaviors. But if you don't circle back to why am I doing this often enough, sometimes the goal you're chasing, you can start chasing it by any means. And so it became over time about more money, more validation, more this and that. And so over time, I found that it was less and less gratifying. it wasn't filling that void. I was not solving for, at the root, maybe a belief system that I didn't deserve it, or that there was a moral issue, or that I was going about it in a way that didn't align with my values. And that's where sort of I came to this whole modeling thing that works, which is I was chasing, again, an outcome that I thought I wanted, but using a mechanism or beliefs or values or behaviors that didn't align. And so what I started to do, or what I had been doing unintentionally, was over a long time, was looking at people I admired. And so I saw, well, these are the daily behaviors they have, and this is what they value, and this is the amount of time they spend doing these things. And so I knew all of them to be true, but it would require me to change a lot of what I had become accustomed to. And that was kind of this dichotomy of, there's a direction I wanted to go mentally, but there was a discomfort with change and having to become and identify as a different person. And I'd gone a long time kind of being able to make enough of the life I thought I wanted while not letting go of creature comforts, of behaviors. And that doesn't work, at least not for a long period of time. And so then I just downloaded all of these behaviors, from health behaviors to family to time to self-care, and just said, I will just apply all of these to my life for an indefinite amount of time and see what happens. And kind of, not like magic, but pretty
A
quickly
little bit.
and exponentially has made some positive change.
Right? Isn't that interesting how when we take action, things change,
Yeah.
right? I was describing to a client today, if we stay in our one stance, it's like we're in this circle, and there's like a certain amount of stuff that's in there with us, right? But then you look across and you see the other people they're doing really awesome stuff, but they're over there and they're doing it in a different way. And unless you're willing to do it in that way, you're just going to be stuck in your bubble with your stuff, right? If we're stuck in rules and regulations, but the person over there is really flexible, we need to allow ourselves to learn how to be flexible, right? If we're trying to prove that we're smart, but that person over there is, doing what they need to do to just surrender and fit in and follow along because that's what needs to happen, right? Like when I had somebody saying, my business coach is telling me that I just need to make these phone calls, but I've been avoiding it. And I'm like, well, what would happen if you made those phone calls? Well, I'd probably get some clients, right? So if we want to do these things, we actually have to we have to be willing to surrender into doing that stuff. So, okay, Kevin. So as you started to allow yourself to model it in this big way, what was the shoe that dropped? What was the moment where you realized, hey, I'm hitting my head against the wall, and if I want to do it a different way, I got to, be willing to model.
Yeah, I'd been in an environment for 13 years, so one firm. And I think within that environment, I was able to do a couple things. The law of averages is that if you operate above average or you compare yourself to the people around you, it can feel very comforting. And so I had done that as an example, compared myself to averages versus my potential. And that allowed me to find some comfort in what I was doing, but not push myself. And ultimately, I wanted to move somewhere that felt more aligned with who I was as a person and where my career was going. So I jumped to an independent wealth management firm, which is where I am now, became a partner there. And in doing so, I put myself in a situation that I wanted to be in, but actually required me to be the person I needed to be. Whereas I was able to pretend that I was growing in the old environment and didn't actually have to change for what I was trying to accomplish.
Yeah,
So
comfort
that was kind of
kills. Yeah, you had to put yourself in a place where you were out of your comfort zone, right? You had
that
to
was
jump
it.
into that bigger pond so that you could show yourself that you really could swim.
Yeah. And so I made that move, and it didn't go well initially. I had not put myself that far out of my comfort zone for a long time. And I mean, all of the things that one can imagine, my body was reacting as if it was being attacked. I was losing sleep. I, was losing weight. I was stressed all the time. I was in fight or flight. And so I just, again, in the early days was like, how do I fix this using all of the things I know? And so when I couldn't sleep, I just watched motivational videos to try and get myself sort of thinking positively. And then I was like, well, I know that journaling is supposed to work. So I started writing in the morning about what I was grateful for and positive affirmations. And then I was like, well, I need to sort of separate myself from my thoughts. So I started meditating and learning how to like dissect and go inwards. And I knew that like getting my nervous system in check was important. So I started doing sauna and cold plunges and exercising more. And so it was just sort of this addition of things. But yeah, the motivator was, I'm in this environment that I say I want to be in. And I'm for the first time recognizing the person I need to be to operate optimally in this environment, to thrive, is not who I've been or who I am. It's who I need to be. And so that's where I just sort of looked at all of the people I admire. What are the things, the behaviors they have, the attitudes, how do they get up, how do they show up, and just check box every day. Do these things.
And what did you
Monday, Tuesday,
notice
Wednesday.
as you got curious about these other people? What did you notice?
About well, I noticed that it's really easy to want what other people have and then to feel like you could have it, but it's a lot harder to actually do what's required. And I think that's sort of the safe space we all live in, is you look at someone who has what you want to have and you're like, I could do that too, but then you don't, and you don't ever put yourself in that situation. And so I recognize is that it obviously takes work. Like if you could have it, you would, but what you're doing isn't getting you that. So you do require some significant change.
But you know
It,
what is interesting? It actually takes effort to stay in the same place, right? You have to, literally bear down, right? And like hold your ground if you don't want to change, right? And that takes a lot of energy, constantly rationalizing in your own mind why it's okay to just let everybody else, run miles ahead of you, but you're okay sitting out here,
well,
right?
and I guess it depends on the environment you're in too, right? If you
Yeah.
keep yourself in an environment where that's what most people are doing, again, there's comfort. One of the things I think that comes up is as you start to grow as an individual, if the people around you don't want to grow, it can become a fairly confrontational environment. And so you might feel like, well, I'm losing friends or I'm having to change. And so there's a lot of things that change. And so you have to be willing to go through that change. The desire to evolve must be so great that you're willing to do whatever it takes. And sometimes that's not the case. I mean, a lot of times there's these speculations you have about what's going to happen. Oh, I'm going to have new friends, or people aren't going to like me, or this is going to change. And that's not always the case. And sometimes you can be the inspiration. If you're going through this really exciting, positive change and your life is getting better, people around you could say, I want that too. And you had the
You
courage
can
to do
become the
it.
model.
Yeah. And people are like, I relate to you. Someone was saying as an example, like, let's use Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins has been around for eons and is this sort of phenom of a human being. It can be hard to relate to that and say, I couldn't do that. But if you see someone that you've known your whole life who is starting to live a more positive life, there's that sort of 1 or 2 degrees of separation of like, you're for far enough ahead of me that I'm excited, but we're close enough related that I can do this. And I think there's a lot more people who maybe are looking for those middle grounds, not somebody who's like egregiously famous and successful and a gazillionaire, but someone who's like just a little bit further ahead than I am. And like, that's
Yeah.
what did you do? Because like, I feel like if you could do it, I could do it too. And that's the motivation some people need, is just to know it's attainable. It's not this wild thing that I couldn't possibly do.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's interesting that you choose Tony Robbins because, well, a lot of what he's talking about is NLP stuff, and he is an advocate for modeling. He's modeled his way to where he got today,
Mm-hmm.
And I when my clients come into the clinic, I will have them, one of the first things that they do is they're looking through a book like this. They're
Mm-hmm.
looking through this big old binder full of stories about people who've been there or done that. And I had somebody come in the other day, and they're a plumber, and I've had somebody come in who was a plumber, and they write down their name and they write down their occupation on the thing, and the problem that they were having was not the same problem, but just because they had the same job, he was like, okay, if this plumber can do it, then I can do it, right? And so it is kind of, choosing a model that you're like, I can relate. We're never ever going to model something that we resent. You want it to be something that you look at and you go, yeah, that could be me. That could totally be me.
I
So you go
was
ahead,
just
sorry.
gonna say, I've wondered kind of what's the motivator, because I know for me there was this situation I put myself in that I felt I either had to just sink or swim. And so I was willing to do whatever it took to thrive in that environment. And I had spent many, many years reading about all these different tools. So I had lots of models to draw from. So it was just this like, okay, finally now is the time to take my own advice. And then it worked for me. There are many people who don't voluntarily put themselves in an uncomfortable enough environment to be forced to make change, or who don't have an uncomfortable environment forced upon them. So then it becomes, well, what type of person is that, and how do they then evoke this change in their life? And so it's kind of one of those things where, sometimes it's having that model that's near enough to them, or it's a change that's simple enough, as an example, at least a starting point, that it doesn't need to be overly uncomfortable, but it's something that they can do.
Well, the thing is, when we change, we're never ever changing from a comfortable place, right? If we are comfortable, we don't have the desire to change. We either have to be in enough pain that we want to get away from that pain, or we have to see something that looks so juicy, we just can't miss out on it. Right. And so for you, you saw the juicy steak and you were like, I want a bite of that. I want some of that. Right. And so you were willing to go towards the pleasure. Right. But a lot of people, they need to be in enough pain that they are willing to run away from that pain. And so we can do that for ourselves. We can, we can salt our own cuts. Right. If, a weight loss client who's saying, but it's just so comfortable to eat these Doritos on the couch every night. Right. But if they tune into their body and they feel how their pants are cutting into them and how it's exhausting to lift themselves off that couch and how they're tired all the time, it's actually not that comfortable. It's not that comfortable at all.
Yeah.
Right. So being willing enough to either look for that juicy thing you want to chase or to be in touch with the reality of how uncomfortable your situation really is.
Yeah. So I think it's super valid. And I think there's a lot of people who sort of are waiting for some sort of motivation. Like, I should feel inspired to change. And I think the reality is, for a lot of people, is that motivation might exist in small spurts, but then wanes. And so you have to have something else that's driving you through that. And in some cases, it's blind faith. It's recognized that if I just do these behaviors long enough, I will start to like this. But there's going to be a period of time where I just need to win the day. I just need to get to the end of today doing these things, and then I'll deal with tomorrow when it comes.
Yeah. So I'm curious, how do you integrate this modeling into your career and when you're working with your clients?
So it's, I mean, a couple different ways. One is in the way that it worked for me. Like, I recognized that there was a limit to what I was capable of if I didn't believe that I was capable of it. And so going through this myself has been really, really important, because, when I'm working with somebody and having them say they want to achieve certain goals and then their unwillingness to do it, it's, well, how do I communicate with them, or how do I ask them enough questions to figure out, why do you keep saying you want to do something, but you're doing something different? So what worked for me, what was most impactful, was to figure out my values. That was one of my catalysts for change. And when I spent some time going through an exercise, figuring out what my core values were, and it was a really basic one. There was sort of an online card deck, and you clicked yes or no to whether it was a value you liked or not, and circled through that until I was down to 5. One of the things I recognized is that the things that I said I valued most weren't necessarily where I was spending my time. And in fact, sometimes the things that I was spending my time doing were actually getting in the way or working in complete contradiction of those values. So, like, family and health are 2 of my 5 core values, but I wasn't taking care of my health in a material way. And a lot of times I was spending more time being social, and not in a good way, or working longer hours unnecessarily, not being strategic with my time at the expense of my family. And so what I did was just got very, I guess, strict with myself and said, if these are my values, then everything I do is going to align with them. And I'm not going to do the things that don't align. So that's an exercise that I now go through with people I'm working with, which is, if you are acting out of alignment of your values, you're never going to feel fulfilled. You're going to limit your growth potential at work. You're probably going to spend money in areas that aren't aligned with your values, intentionally or unintentionally, sometimes to solve for a lack of fulfillment. You're not going to meet your financial goals. Like, it just becomes this sort of inward spiral. So understanding your values means that you can spend money on the things that matter, not spend in the areas you don't. Spend your time on the things that matter, not in the places that don't, ultimately resulting in you being able to invest and grow your wealth more, which then acts as a tool to then fuel it. So that's kind of where my whole journey of modeling is figure out what your values are and build a life of modeling that. And I guess the exercise there might be then find people that you admire who carry those values or who emulate those values, and see what they're doing. Yeah. But a lot of times people don't know what their values are, so they don't know who to model. And so the question of modeling becomes, well, I don't know what I want to be, or I don't know what looks good, or I don't know what someone is doing that has the life I want to have. So it just gets to the core of, well, if you could build a person that inspires you the most, what traits would they have? And either behave that way if you know what that looks like, or go find people that embody that already and do the things that they're doing.
Yeah. I think for a lot of people too, it's that they believe that they have these values. They go, yeah, I really value family, right? But they were doing like you were doing, and like I really value family, but then they're working 80 hours a week, right? And so our real values are where we're spending our time, money, and our energy, our resources, right? That's what our actual values are. The other ones are just, they're ideals. They're like ideas of things that we wish that we had, right? So a lot of people's real values, what they're really valuing is, playing safe, or they're really valuing never, putting themselves in a situation where they could be, at risk of scrutiny or whatever, right? And that's what they're showing that their real values are, and it's keeping their lives way smaller than they want them to be. Mm-hmm. So being able to look at a model, and even if their values are different from the ones that you're living out, being willing to go, hey, is it okay if I step into that value? What would that be like, right? And when we step into values, we also need to step into like the beliefs that go along with those, right? So, if we value connection with other people, then one of our beliefs might be that, generally most people are going to be open and willing to connect. And there's going to be some people that aren't, but, having that as a belief. So I'm curious, what are some of the beliefs that you find that you really are holding as that are allowing you to take action in this way, to be in this new space?
I guess at the core, that anything's possible. I recognize that up to a certain point, and I think you had talked about this, is we create rules for ourselves, that there's limitations, that life is happening to me, that I couldn't do that, or I'm not the type of person. And in recently, it's just been that there are no limitations, that you can do whatever you want, and that just comes through. For me, it came through in practicing reciting that daily. Like it was really cheesy in the beginning, um, from something as simple as believing I was deserving of my own love, as an example, or my own self-respect. That was something I worked on, and then writing it down every day and reciting it, and then being of abundance. That so it just becomes this, like, whatever you think you want, truly getting in touch with believing that's possible. And at its most basic thing, it's just reprogramming your brain. And that was, I guess, one of the belief systems I had was, or reformatted, was that the voice in our heads that talk to us is informed by who we are up to this point. But we tend to blindly believe it as if it's some sort of omnipotent voice that's accurate and tells us the truth. And so recognizing that, no, it has just been informed by my life up to this point, so I have to change it. And that it is changeable. And so that was a belief system, that I can change the way that I think, or that perspective is reality. So if I change my perspective, I can in fact change reality. So as soon as you start taking control of these things, I find, recognizing that this isn't de facto way of being, this is just the way it is now, I can in fact change how I see the world. And here are the tools to do that. And if I just do it long enough, I will in fact see the world differently. That was sort of the big belief system change. And then just practicing over and over again, and working through the parts of it where you're telling yourself, I told myself, you're an idiot. Like, there's the voice is just like, you're just trying to brainwash yourself, and you're just tricking yourself, and because you're just so programmed to doubt and to be pessimistic, or to not believe in yourself, or this is different. And again, it could just be a safety mechanism. You're protecting yourself from being hurt, or from failing, or being vulnerable. But it just was like, this is what people do. This is what a Tony Robbins says. This is what, like, just keep doing it. Just keep saying this. And a year and a half later, for me, it's like the brain is different, and the belief system is different. And it's like the world around me is exactly the same as it was, but the world inside me is entirely different. And as a result, the world around me is starting to change more rapidly than I thought possible.
Yeah, you're probably getting different responses from the world around you now. Yeah. Exactly. That is that pattern interruption, that continual, like being willing to just do it long enough that it becomes the way that it is. And a lot of people, they get to the point where they have the awareness all of a sudden. They go, wow, I've become aware that I'm doing this thing that I don't want to be doing, and I can see a different way to do it. And they do it one time, and maybe it doesn't go exactly as they want it to, and they go, okay, and then they never do it again. But if you're willing to do that and do that and do that and do that, then all of a sudden here you are, right? It's a year and a half later, and you know, I'm curious, what changes have you noticed in your life from being willing to surrender into the modeling? How has your life, grown?
I mean, there's a lot of things that changed. Up to a certain point, I had this expectation that people around me needed to at least meet me in the middle, as an example. So I look at my relationship. There were things that weren't going exactly the way that I wanted in the relationship. And so there was like, well, here's the reason why. And it's kind of my responsibility, but it's kind of not my responsibility. And so taking complete ownership over starting with me and working in every area, the things around me that I thought weren't my responsibility or that I didn't have influence over have started to change. So my relationship after 10 years of marriage is better than it has ever been. And my relationship with my kids is better. The behaviors that I had hoped to see from them, both as kids, as a partner, have started to change. But I think obviously because it's coming from a place of I don't say inspiration, but like I'm willing to make the change. So it's this really cool sort of the world around me is changing in that sense, not because I'm out there trying to change people, but I'm working so hard on changing myself that the change naturally occurs. People start to behave differently around you. I'm starting to, just interactions with people are far more
Right.
engaging. People are
You've
more
got this
curious.
gravitational pull now.
Yeah, it's super interesting, and that was kind of the idea, like my why, as it were. I recognized was that I never thought I could be someone that was inspiring. Like I looked to all these other people for inspiration because they were amazing. And it was never me. I was never the person that was inspiring. And so I wanted to be that person. I decided that the little boy in me needs to know that the grown up me can be that person too. And so what would I have to become the most inspiring person I know? Because every famous person has certain character traits that I love, but maybe a bunch of other ones that I'm not fond of. So you kind of cherry pick. I want this from this person and this from this person and this, and you design what you love. Who would your hero be? And how can you be that person? And that's the motivator. It's like, we'll just do that every day. Every day, I want to be the most inspiring person that I know. And only I can define that. But then that makes my opinion so much more valuable. It makes the self respect I give myself for doing that so much better. And then the people around me are far more receptive, I would say, or just it's just amazing the change that can happen when you respect yourself enough to show up that much for yourself.
Yeah. And hopefully you can be an inspiration and a model for some of the people who are tuning in and listening to this podcast, and they can try on some of your values and the way that you show up in the world. So Kevin, I would love to keep talking to you all afternoon, but I think we're going to have to stop it here. Before we wrap up, if people want to reach out to you, if they're like, hey, I need somebody to help me with my money mindset and to getting on the right track, and maybe they even just want to start to absorb some of what's going on with you, how are they going to do that? How can they get a hold of you, Kevin?
You can find me on LinkedIn, on Instagram, or on Facebook. I believe on Facebook it's KS Parton. On Instagram, Kevin_Parton. And on LinkedIn, I think it's Kevin Parton, Certified Financial Planner, or CFP. And I use those platforms to share a lot of my journey, what I'm going through personally, how I'm sort of putting these practices in place, and sort of reflections I've had. A lot of it relating back to how all of these things impact how you relate to wealth and how to build wealth. But yeah, so that's kind of where people can find me. They can follow me. And if they have any questions, they can reach out to me directly on any of those platforms.
Okay. And I'm going to make sure that I put all those links below so that you can get a hold of Kevin. And it's true. It's very inspiring. He's showing up all the time. You'll definitely be along for the ride if you follow along with Kevin. So is there anything that you want to leave the listeners with when it comes to modeling or stepping into this kind of money mindset and our values?
Yeah, I think a big takeaway or something that I'm sort of trying to impress upon people is this sticking to it. So 2024 was a big year for me because I committed to 365 days. I picked the traits or the things, the behaviors that I wanted to model and committed to 365 days because it can feel like a lot, but in the grand scheme of life, a year is really not a lot. And if it really comes down to changing you to be the absolute best version of who you say you want to be, it's not huge. And 365 days is long enough that you're not just changing your behavior and then going to revert back. You've done it long enough that you start to identify as that type of person and you almost forget who you used to be. So, a coach of mine said, you've taken the red pill as an example, because I was worried that if I stopped doing some of these things, I'm going to fall back on old habits. And he's like, no, you've been doing it long enough that you don't have those old habits anymore. You can now start to integrate different behaviors. But that would be if it's a trick, is figure out your values, pick the behaviors you want to model and stick to it for a year. And if you can do that, if you can give yourself that permission, by the end of that year, you will be a new person and anything is possible.
Anything is possible. That's true. So let's leave here with that belief. Thank you for joining me today, Kevin. It was wonderful talking to you. I
Thanks for
truly
having
believe.
me.
Yeah, it was so good. Okay. So anything is possible. Remember that, guys.